Hello, I'm Janet Oglemeter, the president for the Chelsea Area Historical Society, and I hope that you've all enjoyed the dinner. I'm going to have the pleasure to introduce who I think is familiar to most of you here in Chelsea and who's a great asset to the Chelsea Area Historical Society. He's also a good friend of the Daniels family. George Till will be introducing Bob.
One thing that's really unique about the city of Chelsea is that we're all family. And this activity here tonight proves that, how cohesive our community is and how everyone gets along so well. And for the last several days, I've been trying to think, what can I say about the Daniels family? What adjectives can I use to describe the Daniels family? And I said to myself, well, the Daniels family is a living legacy. If Chelsea probably wouldn't be what it is today without the Daniels family. The Daniels family they're humanitarians. They're involved in educational processes. They do many things for the community, and they're nice people. In fact, one lifelong resident, Lois Emmert Hepburn, said yesterday, she used to babysit for the Daniels family back in the day. She said to my wife, she said, you know, Marge and Bob are the nicest people. And I think everybody here would agree to that. And so I would like to introduce one of the nicest people I know, and from the Daniels charismatic family, Mr. Bob Daniels.
Thank you very much for the kind words, George.
Okay with that?
Sure.
Okay.
I read the things that are around town, and it said, an evening with Marge and Bob Daniels. That is frightening. That's terrible. I said, Marjorie, are you going to speak? And she said, no. You know, I brought an old friend with me. I mean the hat, not Marjorie. This is a hat that I started wearing in 1944. That was before Donna Lane was around very much. And this hat has some coal dust caked on the inside of it. And it was in the closet at home. Marjorie said just a few minutes ago, where'd you get that hat? And it was in the closet at home, is all I know. So it was probably 40 or 30 or 20 years old when I got it. But it's a friend of mine, and it's got a 16-penny spike here, and there's a fellow sitting back there, Matt Winkowski, who knows what a 16-penny spike is. And it proves that everybody doesn't have a good idea all the time. Because the spike is about 3.5 inches long, and it's made out of aluminum. And if you take a 16-ounce hammer and hit the spike with a little bit of a glance, it's going to curve right over. It'll just bend. So it was a dumb idea. That's not nice, Nita. Anyway, back in the 1940s, my father was a great worker. His name was Warren Daniels. Sporty was his nickname because everybody liked him a lot. And he used to start work at 6, 7 in the morning and go till 11 o'clock at night. We were in the wheat business, so especially if the wheat was heating. Wheat will heat, and so you've got to keep moving it. So he would have to be there until 11 o'clock at night. So he wanted me to be a worker. Okay? So I was shoveling coal and shoveling wheat at that time, and I would work till about 7 o'clock at night. And then I'd run down to the lake at Kavanaugh Lake by the dock, and I'd have a bar of soap with me. And I'd scrub and I'd get all the coal dirt off of me. And so I looked presentable, I thought. So then I'd rush up to the house and get something to eat. And then I'd drive like mad to Island Lake Road, where Marjorie lived. And I'd park under a big tree. I don't know what kind of a tree it was. It was a big tree. And then I'd walk up the lawn there to the porch, and there would be about 15 barn cats trying to get into the house. You know, they were called barn cats because they weren't house cats. So you'd kick with your feet, and if you got in the screen door with only 2 cats getting in with you, you were successful. That was great. So I'd get in there and I'd say, Sylvia, Marjorie's mother, is Marjorie here? Because I'd worked hard to get there, you know, as fast as possible. She said, no, Marjorie's out in the field driving tractor. And I'm thinking, my gosh, I worked 10, 11 hours, and Marjorie's still working out there in the field. But it was okay, because when she came in, I got to tell you, she had these short shorts on. And they had a little slit in the side, both sides. I've got a picture of those shorts and Marjorie in my billfold, so if you want to come up after the service, I'll show it to you. You know, I only dated 4 girls in my whole life. 4 girls. And 2 of them were the blind date type that you could hardly wait to get away from them, you know. And the 3rd one left me for somebody that was a better deal. And she was right, because he was a better deal. And they're friends of ours now. And the 4th one was Marjorie, so she got stuck with the crumbs that were left, see? So we dated for about 5 years. And one night in October 1950, we came driving in the driveway and parked under that same big tree. Parked under the same big tree. I don't know, we were just sitting there. I don't think anything wrong was going on. Anyway, she said, Bob, I think we'd better get married. And I thought that was something that I was supposed to be involved in. But so I said, Marjorie, I think you're right. So that was in October of 1950. We got married on December 21st, 1950. And if you go through the arithmetic, if you're good at numbers, the anniversary we celebrated in December was a significant anniversary. 2 days ago, honey, I forgot this. I went over to the Comfort Inn and asked them if they had a honeymoon suite. And they did. And so I was going to book it for tonight, because I haven't done a very good job of celebrating that significant anniversary. So I was going to do that. But, honey, I thought it was a little more than we should spend. So So I booked the senior citizen suite. It's got a bed in it, but the bathroom's down the hall. Do you remember when the hospital was built out here? These doctors in Chelsea, new doctors, you know, came to town and decided to build a hospital on the peat marsh because there was a peat factory out here, and as kids we were told not to go in that peat factory because it was dangerous. But they built it out here anyway. And I was talking to Bruce Stubbs' son, young Bruce, and he said, Dad won't tell you this, but do you know that they were working on getting the foundations in, and they had a bulldozer and a backhoe, and a backhoe is a big piece of equipment. And they went down in the peat beds. They got the bulldozer out, but they couldn't get the backhoe out, so they built the hospital over the backhoe. So the backhoe is someplace under the hospital over there, I don't know. You remember when all of a sudden they were buying a lot of property out at south of town, and we didn't know what it was. And it turned out to be the Chrysler Proving Grounds. Do you remember when they built the new high school? Do you remember when the Purple Rose Theater came in? Do you remember when the Common Grill came in? Do you remember when Jiffy Mix, the Chelsea Milling Company, did the continuous pour, where they built those silos and they start pouring it and they couldn't stop because it's a sliding form that goes up the silos that are immediately below hide lofts. It's interesting that some of these things are in our memory and are important to us. And we say, do you remember when this happened or something else happened? And that's important. I mean, these structures, these buildings are important to the community. But I'll tell you something that's equally as important. I remember the story of Aileen Steinball, Ray's mother. And she was meeting with some women on Mondays every week. They were making teddy bears. And the teddy bears were for children that were in the hospital and needed something that was theirs, which would help them get through the experience of being in the hospital. A lot of you have done volunteer work. A lot of you are contributing quietly to what is successful in Chelsea. Because I strongly believe that Chelsea has a character, a strength, a hidden strength that is peculiar to Chelsea. I mean, I remember a man by the name of Loring Bates who called on the lumber company. I'm involved with the lumber company, in case you don't know. Okay. Called on the lumber company down by the old railroad tracks, or not the old railroad, the railroad tracks. Loring was a quiet guy, and he lived in the Detroit area. And he would be there at 8 o'clock every Monday morning. And we'd say, Loring, no, we don't have anything, because we were buying from a different wholesaler. We don't have anything. Loring kept coming back at 8 o'clock every Monday morning, I think for a full year. We finally said, Loring, do you have, and we bought something from him. And we continued to buy from Loring because he was so dependable. He ended up buying a house at the end of Madison Street on Washington Street. And he and Mrs. Bates moved in there. And after he had been in Chelsea for 4 or 5 years, he said, you know, We enjoy Chelsea 10 times more than we ever imagined we could. It's that special. So I think there's two parts of it. One is the structures, the remember when things. And the other is the contribution that all of you, everybody, makes to making special, Chelsea special. I want to tell you a story about two wonderful people. One was Warren Spalding. The other was Dorothea Pielemeyer. Dorothea's brother Albert owned a farm, and the lumber company out by the expressway is on that farm right now. We bought it from Albert Pielemeyer. Dorothea was not a small woman. She was never married. She was tallish, let's say. She had white hair. She had a white bun at the back of her head. When she spoke to people, she would shake. And very often she would have a page that she'd ripped out one of these little tablet things that have all the little rings on them, so you rip the page out and it's all frayed. So I've seen Dorothea speak, I'm jumping ahead here, in Detroit to people. She'd ask the blessing before a meal. Be 150 people there, and her hand would shake. And there wasn't a dry eye in the place. But anyway, going back to the beginning, Dorothea and Albert used to have children that were in need, special needs kids, that they would take to St. Paul's Church. I've been told that. Warren had a tragic experience. He had a sister named Bertha. She taught elementary school in the Grand Rapids area. And Bertha and Warren were driving on the old Chelsea-Manchester Road, and he turned left to go on to Jerusalem Road, and the car was hit, and Bertha was killed. This impacted Warren greatly. So Dorothea, over a period of time, was with Warren and said, Warren, you've got to donate your farm to children. You've got to do something with that farm. So he did. He wanted kids to be running around the farm. And Spalding for Children was started in 1967. And after that, there would be some kids there for an ice cream social or something, but there was no intention for Spalding for Children to put kids there permanently. I remember sitting at a boardroom table where we were making decisions having to do with the future of Spalding for Children. Spalding for Children placed special needs kids. Initially, they were physically handicapped. Now it is still in existence, Spalding for Children is. And it's more emotionally handicapped now, kids that have been kicked around the system. But anyway, sitting at this boardroom table, it was an old oak table that Warren had. With all the leaves in it, it was about 12 feet, I'd say. And here were these people from Detroit, Ypsilanti, that were serving on the board. You sat on these rickety chairs. You had to spread your legs a little bit and put your feet out wide because the chair might collapse to the side. It felt like it anyway. Warren was sitting in the kitchen, right over to the right. The oven door was open because there was no heat in the kitchen. And you could hear the rocking chair as Warren rocked in it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth while we held the board meeting. There was a light fixture with raw bulbs, about 3 raw bulbs hanging down. We went from that to eventually selling the farm to the McClear family, that was related to Warren Spalding. Because we had to be in Detroit. We had offices in Detroit, and we had the farm out here on Walters Road, just south of Chelsea. There was a woman by the name of Kay Donnelly who was hired as executive director, and she was dynamic. I mean, she could talk like nobody could talk. I saw her in the basement of the Congregational Church at a Kiwanis meeting. Again, there was not a dry eye in the place. All these men, you know, that thought they were macho, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. She talked about the kids. She took 2 kids and went out to talk to Mike Lucci at a Detroit Lions practice. And he ended up, because of her convincing, doing 30 golf tournaments, 30 years of golf tournaments. If it weren't for Mike Lucci, we wouldn't have survived. Kay stayed with us until about 1975. There were 2 judges, one Steckity in Grand Rapids and one Judge Lincoln in Wayne County. And they encouraged us. I say, I'm taking liberties. I was not doing it, so it's not fair. But encouraged us to shake the system up. Go after Lansing, go after all the professionals in Lansing, and make this something that would be permanent. Stupid things like there were 300 files for kids found behind a drawer in Wayne County that were just slipped down there, and so the kids were no longer in the system, so to speak. In about 1975, after Kay left, we had a budget of $165,000. That was all the wages, all of the taxes on the building, maintenance of the farmhouse, everything, $165,000. If it weren't for Mike's golf tournaments, we wouldn't have made it. We hired a woman by the name of Judy McPhillips, and she was 22 years with Spalding. Now Addie Williams is the CEO of Spalding. It's in Southfield, and I attended a dinner in Detroit, and there was a woman from Los Angeles there. I knew the answer, but she said, "Do you realize that Spalding is the grandfather of special needs adoption in the United States?" I said, "Oh, really?" But they are. The budget is $9 million now. And the reason is that the federal government uses Spalding to administer a lot of the special needs adoption efforts in the United States. We're the National Resource Center for the federal government. So the only reason I'm telling you this story is because it came from Chelsea. So there's so much that we can do as individuals. It isn't all buildings. There's more to it than that. There's this hard to describe thing that I believe is a part of Chelsea. I'm proud of my mother, my father, and my brother for some of the things they did. George was very complimentary. I appreciate that very much. We were, as a family, not perfect by any means. My mother and father were born in the late 1800s, 1889 for my father, 1892 for my mother. It's interesting to me how young this nation is because their parents were born in the 1860s. Do you know that's only 30 years before Chelsea started, or after Chelsea started? It's only 90 years from 1776. So the city is young, the country is young. My mother was very involved in the community. She was very active in the Methodist Church. She was the one that successfully convinced Mrs. McEwen to give the McEwen building to the village so it could be used as a library. She was involved in starting the United Way. She had a reputation. There was a man by the name of Pete Bacon who was the CEO of Central Fiber down on Main Street, North Main Street. And the story was that mother's name was Gertrude. She would go in and knock on Pete's door at Central Fiber. And Pete would say, "Come in, Gertrude. What are you and I going to do now, Gertrude?" My dad was a fun guy. They were married in 1917. He had sold Dodge automobiles in the 1920s, switched to Buicks and Oldsmobiles in the 1930s. I have had people come to me in the 70s, even as late as that. They'd say, "I never bought a car from anybody but Sporty." That was his nickname. The reason was that when the war was over, Second World War was over, he wouldn't sell an automobile to anybody but somebody who'd served in the service. They had to be veterans or he wouldn't sell them an automobile. So he built up a tremendous following of people that wanted to buy cars from Sporty. My brother Jim was involved in the hospital in fundraising. He did a lot of carving. If you go to the Sylvan building out there in Sylvan Center, the thing over the entrance, Jim carved that. Jim was the kind of guy that would wake up at 7 in the morning and go till 10 o'clock at night and never watch television. He got into horseshoe, he concentrated on different things at different times. Got into horseshoe pitching. He could throw 13 ringers in a row with no question. 12 to 13, 14, if he got hot, maybe 15. So a tournament down in Indiana, and I knew he was going on this weekend, and he came back, and I said, "Jim, how'd you do in the tournament?" "No good, Bob. There's guys down there that'll throw 25 ringers without even hesitating." So he was that type of a person. I started working at the lumber company in 1943. I went up to George Doe's. George Doe was the police chief, and I think he was the only member of our police department. George Doe was uptown, and I had a 4-door Oldsmobile. And he said, "Let's go out on Freer Road." Now, Freer Road, as you know it now, has houses on it, and driveways, and lawns, and a sidewalk. No. Freer Road had trees on both sides. It was gravel, and it had these big bushes. Great big bushes. They must have, my memory, I was 14 years old. I had a birthday on 10 March 1943. Anyway, what I used to do with a bunch of buddies is crawl across the field and hide in the bushes, and some of these were kids that were older than I was, but they'd park in cars, and then I'd listen to what was happening in the car, and I'd never quite understood what was happening in the car. But anyway, I drove down the center of Freer Road, got back uptown, and George says, "You're okay, you've got a driver's license." That was it. So on Saturday the 13th, I reported at the Chelsea Lumber Grain and Coal Company was the name of it. Down there, I was 14 years old. My dad said, go and load 1.5 tons of Pocahontas coal. Okay, I'll do that. Now, if you use the number 10 shovel, it'll take 85 shovels to get a ton, okay? So I got 1.5 tons in there, came back up there, and I was short about 400 pounds. So I went back and forth about 4 times. I was driving an old Chevrolet pickup, and it didn't have an accelerator pedal. Just had the peg sticking up, you know, because I could feel it in the bottom of my shoe. So we started out, and Dad was in the co-pilot seat. It had snowed quite a bit. So we went down West Middle Street, crossed the tracks, past the old people's home. That's what it was called then, the old people's home or the Methodist home. It's not called that now. Went across the railroad tracks, started down Kavanaugh Lake Road, and if you've got 1.5 tons of Pocahontas coal in the rear end of your pickup truck, the front end's pretty light. So sure enough, I nosed into the snowbank to the right, rear end kicked to the other snowbank, and interestingly enough, I ended up going the way we wanted to go. So we kept going. I didn't say anything. Dad didn't say anything. We unloaded the coal, came back. I got on the scales with the truck. Dad got out. Go and get another 1.5 tons of Pocahontas coal. I think you're ready to go alone. Now, as a parent, I would not have said that. Is there work to do in Chelsea yet? Sure. We can't stop. We got to keep working. Are there distressed areas? Sure. I mean, there's several properties that need work or need somebody using them. There's the Longworth property, the Palmer property, the old post office, the Federal Screw properties. But I'll tell you, it's going to work out, folks. It will work out. People by the name of Howard Deerdorf and Lincoln Posey have been hired to study these areas in the next 4 months. I think it's a great idea. It was not my idea, but I think it's a great idea. Study these properties and come up with recommendations of what we can do. Just as a starter, the hospital is going to spend $60 million to redo some of the hospital and build new hospital facilities. $60 million. It'll start in March, and they propose that or suggest that it will probably be finished about August of next year. That's a great start. But we've got to work hard to handle the issues involving all of the properties, because those are going to be 50 years from now, the remember whens. Do you remember when they did this? Do you remember when they did that? But I'll tell you, folks, it won't happen without the efforts of every individual here. Because it's the Aileen Steinbaugh building the teddy bears. It's the people volunteering to make Chelsea special that will make things happen. Don't forget that. I believe that. I believe very strongly that the most important thing is the efforts of every one of you, the Aileen Steinbaughs and you yourself. Thank you, Marjorie. for 60 great years. Thank you.